Hi folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. I wanted to talk to you today about Minuteman tactics. Yeah, Minuteman, you know what that is. We shouldn't have to go into too great detail of what that is, but tactics and equipment that we as civilians, even if you have previously served, maybe even your active duty and you end up gonna be a Minuteman to protect your home and your community, the tactics and the equipment are a little bit different, and I wanted to talk about that here today for just a few minutes. It's afternoon coffee time. I don't do this all the time, but I'm kind of tired and dragging. Yesterday was a very, very busy day. Did a lot of driving, spent time with the children and the beautiful grandchildren, so I'm a little tired. So I got some mushroom coffee. It's got a little bit of coffee and a lot of really good mushrooms that they're good for you, you know? So anyways, also, I wanted to make a note in a couple of things. News-wise, apparently there was a tornado over in North Carolina and it destroyed a large Pfizer facility. I know, that breaks everyone's hearts. Some people are saying, well, that's, you know, maybe that's just how things go. Karma, if you believe in that, or maybe God's wrath, if you believe in that. Now, but here's the thing. A couple of things to think of. Regardless of how good or bad they are, that is medication that Americans would be using. They said something like 50,000 pallets, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's 50,000 cases of medications, prescription medications were destroyed in that tornado. That's going to be a shortage, folks. And then what that's going to do is put us even more dependent upon Chinese manufactured pharmaceuticals. So just thought I'd put that out there. Also, I just uploaded my weekly podcast. I do a 2-hour podcast every week, typically on Wednesdays, and it is now live. You can go over to Spotify, you can go to Apple Podcasts or several other places to listen to it. You get to listen to the first hour for free. If you want to listen to the second hour, you need to sign up to Locals, my Locals membership group, and then you can go over there on Locals and listen to the second half of the podcast. It's a pretty good one. We're talking about the left's war against biblical masculinity. There's a lot of masculine things going on, a lot of talk about masculinity, and there's this pushback from traditional men or just regular men against all of this, you know, ultra feminized, far left ideology. But the question is that pushback being put in the right direction? Or is there another psyop going on to push us into following not very good examples of masculinity? So listen to that podcast over at Spotify, Apple, and many other places. So on to the discussion. You know, it's very common, and in this, you know, when I talk about this, I kind of have to talk about it in different ways. From someone that's a civilian that has never served in the military like myself, then there's the civilian that has served once as a police officer or some type of law enforcement, and then there's the civilians that have previously served as a, you know, in some type of military fashion, and then there's also those that just aren't civilians right now technically because they're actively or maybe in reserve status. Thing to remember is that if we go into Minuteman mode, where we have to actively defend our homes, our properties, our communities, our families, things are going to be very different than the formal training that you have received as a soldier, as a police officer, or the formal type of training that is online from a lot of people that is based specifically on military style training for even the average citizen. It's going to be very different. And while a lot of these videos and things that you can find online show some certainly good things, you know, they really show that how to do certain things. This is how the military does it. This is how the Army Rangers, the Navy SEALs, so on and so forth. You can certainly get some really good nuggets from that. But you have to realize the situation that you will be in if you ever find yourself in a Minuteman scenario is going to be very different than that style of training, for various reasons. Number one, and this is probably the biggest one, is it's just going to be you or you and a few people. Even if you find yourself in a larger, more organized militia, it's still nowhere near the size of the U.S. Army or the U.S. Marines or the U.S. Navy or the U.S. Air Force, I mean, we got at least, in the Navy, we'll give them a free nod. But you don't have the supply chains. The ammunition that you have to use is what's on your back or at your home, and maybe your home's been overrun. Maybe it's been burned to the ground, or maybe you've used it all up. And so all the ammunition you have is what's on you. You don't have a supply chain. You don't have any type of supply chain for food or any other type of resources. You are on your own, typically, in these types of scenarios. You're just not going to have it. Medical. You may have a medic within your group. It's very possible, though, that his training or her training may not be quite up to par as the current medic. Maybe their training is from many years ago. Maybe it's kind of subpar knowledge and training, but it's the best your group can come up with. The medical needs, the supplies, you're just not going to have that either. You have to understand that the average Minuteman, whether it's a singular person, a couple, a family, or a whole unit, you just don't have the supply chains. And so that, number one, is going to greatly affect it. Number two, the thing that's going to affect it is the fact that you don't have the intelligence, the infrastructure, and the technology on your side. Yes, you can go out and you can purchase drones. You can actually purchase some pretty good quality drones for a reasonable price now. In fact, you can actually purchase drones that are very near the quality that the military uses. But you don't have satellites. You don't have lots of drones. You don't have listening devices. You don't have the intelligence capability, gathering capability of the U.S. military and intelligence agencies. You just don't have as much. You have to wrap your head around that. You also don't have years and years of training. And even if you did once upon a time, I would say that most of you, it's been a while since you've done that level of training. And you don't have the money machine behind it, the military-industrial complex, to train you like you once did, or like you've never been trained before. And so the quality of yourself probably isn't just quite up to snuff as what it once was, even if you were once in some type of specialized unit that, we can't speak of because it's all top secret. The fact is, it's just not. Now, let's move on to equipment. Equipment is also going to be different, and not just equipment, but how you place the equipment, because again, you're on your own. One of the biggest reasons why equipment should be looked upon differently, how you wear it, what's on, all that kind of stuff, is that most any person that's going to be protecting themselves and their family, you really are a Minuteman. You see, a soldier, they're not really a Minuteman, not at all. When they're on their base, wherever they are, whatever fort base that they're at in the United States, there's not really a threat to them at that moment. So they may be in uniform, but they don't have their equipment with them. They don't have to train to react at a moment's notice. When they get the call to go into war or into battle, they have time. They have time. And then if they are in a war, in a forward operating position, then of course they pretty much have their equipment on at all times. And while they may have certain jobs to do, their main focus is the fact that they are there for war, and that's what they're focused on. And so their gear is on, and it's placed, and it's designed in a way that works for someone that is your sole job, is to sit around and wait for a battle. And I'm not putting any of you down, so please don't get all upset and offended by how I say that. The fact is that a Minuteman is a farmer, is a shopkeeper, is a husband and a wife. He's taking care of the cattle and the sheep. He's digging in the garden. He's repairing something. He's spending time with the family. And then danger arises, and they may only have moments to react to get themselves from being a farmer or a husband or a wife or a father to being a combat-ready soldier. And so your equipment has to be different. And I see a lot of videos out there that provide very good and very high-quality educational content, but it's all looked upon from the perspective of maybe the people making the content or whatever, strictly a military perspective, meaning that their gear is placed and they're using a type of gear. Let me give you just an example, and this is just one example. It is very common now, although this has changed over the years, but it's become pretty common, especially for more of your, special operations, tier 1, tier 2, maybe tier 3 guys. They're war belts. their war belts are not placed on top of an existing belt. Some of you understand this. They don't have an inner and an outer belt. Their war belt is woven through their pants, the loops of their pants. And so before they go into battle, they have to weave that belt through their pants loop, and then each time taking the time to place the holsters and the magazine pouches and stuff on it. It makes for a much more secure setup, but it's kind of time consuming to put it on. But as a soldier, you have time to do that. You have time to kind of get things in order because you know usually when your missions are coming up. Whereas a Minuteman, you don't have time to stand there and feed that belt through and put different pouches on. Best bet for you is to have a belt that slips over everything, that easily slips over everything, so that you can grab that belt as you're running out the bedroom and slap it on, and you have a firearm, you have magazines, you have a flashlight, and anything else, some type of IFAK and everything on that belt. Now that's just a tiny example, but it's something that you should consider, because I find too often that people are trying to, whether they've been in the military or not, they're trying to pattern their Minuteman tactics specifically and exactly on what we've seen and what people know of the military. And it's not because military training is subpar. It's because military training, and that's usually not true. American military training is probably the best in the world with, you know, there's a few areas around the world you could make a different argument, but generally speaking, that's not the point. The point is that it's not for Minutemen. It's not for the citizen soldier. It's not for the professional citizen. It's not for the farmer and the shopkeeper and the husband and the father and the guy out in the field tending the sheep. It's not for them because their situation is very different. So always remember that when you're training, when you're reading material, when you're developing your gear, don't just look at, say, a Green Beret or an Army Ranger or a Navy SEAL or so on and so forth and say, this is really cool. This is how I want to look. This is the type of gear that I want. This is the placement that I want. Oh, this is the training that they get. I want to emulate this type of training. Sometimes it has to be changed a little bit. It has to be catered and adapted to your environment. And your environment is that you are a homestead. You have other things to do. And most likely, the most likely scenario for a homesteader to have to deal with in the future is something that arises immediately, where you only have moments to respond. You may not have, minutes or hours or especially days to plan out some type of attack or an assault upon you. You may only have seconds. You are the 911. You got bad guys coming up your driveway. You have to react immediately to take care of your business and to protect your family. You don't have time to put on all the equipment. You don't have time to make sure everything works. Yes, there will be times that you have that available time when you're maybe going on patrol and doing things as a proactive manner. But most of the times that you will probably fight and find yourself in a firefight, it's going to be when you only have moments to prepare. So I would advise you to cater your training and your gear around being a Minuteman. Your gear around being able to put it on very, very rapidly. And then I would advise you to also train that way. Have your gear set up. If it's in your bedroom, that's where mine is. It's setting in a certain way in a certain place, so that if something happens, usually in the middle of the night, something goes bump in the night, I can very rapidly put on what I need to go out and take care of business. And then you should train that way. Set your alarm for the middle of the night. When it goes off, very rapidly jump up, slip your boots on, slip a belt on, grab a rifle, hat, jacket, flashlight, whatever it is, and run out the door and just see how long it takes you. Kind of like a firefighter. For those of you that's been firefighters, you should actually be very good at this, maybe even better at this than the average law enforcement or military personnel, because that's actually something that most firefighters train to do. And so think of it in that way and understand that while military tactics, military gear are all good, we have to adjust them and adapt them for our situation, because we're not in the same situation and we won't be, most likely, as things progress into the future. Folks, it's time to get your houses in order, and it's time to prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.